Okay, I would like to introduce Reverend Phil Hodson, the acting conference minister for the Pacific Northwest United Church of Christ, to introduce our invited special speaker this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. It is my joy to be the one who brings the introduction of the Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson this evening as our keynote. The Reverend Dr. Thompson is the newly elected General Minister, President, and CEO of the United Church of Christ. Reverend Dr. Thompson is the first woman and the first woman of African descent to serve as leader of our denomination. Prior to this call, Reverend Dr. Thompson served in the national setting of the United Church of Christ for 14 years, 2 years as Minister for Racial Justice, and 8 years as Minister for Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations, and 4 years as the Associate General Minister for Wider Church Ministries and co-executive for Global Ministries. She was elected as Associate General Minister in 2019. Her passion for justice and equity moved her work on behalf of the United Church of Christ into a global context, affording the opportunity to participate globally in efforts to reduce the marginalization experienced by African descendant peoples and other communities globally. Before joining the national staff, the Reverend Dr. Thompson served in the Florida Conference of the United Church of Christ as a pastor and as the Minister for Disaster Response and Recovery on the conference staff. She also worked in the nonprofit arena for over 10 years in senior leadership positions. The Reverend Dr. Thompson earned a Bachelor of Arts from Brooklyn College in New York, a Master's in Public Administration from North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina, and a Master of Divinity from Union Theological Seminary in New York. She also studied public policy at Duke University and earned her doctorate in ministry at Seattle University. She was awarded an honorary doctorate from Heidelberg University. Won't you please join me in welcoming tonight the Reverend Dr. Karen Georgia Thompson.
Looking at you. You did this. So let me try that again. Good evening. Good evening. It is good to be present with you. I'm going to keep adjusting this until I get it right. I am height challenged, and so I adapt accordingly to places and spaces that insist on putting things above my head. I'm good with that. Thank you for the introduction and also for the invitation. It is a joy to be here with you all this evening. This is my first time in Spokane. And so even though it's a brief pass through, I got here this afternoon, I'll be out of here tomorrow morning. It is still wonderful to be able to see the difference between this and Seattle. Okay, if you can't hear me, put your hand up. Okay. All right, I'm gonna try to project my voice. I'm not really one to be all up in the microphone. That's just not my thing. So we're gonna amplify as best as we can, and if I need to, I'm gonna take the microphone, one of these, and just hold that. All right. So I'm going to be looking for cues. If you can't hear me, just raise your hand and I will adapt accordingly. All right, so we are here this evening to celebrate. This is a celebration. We're just going to do this. Because it's also in my face and I can't see anybody. Okay, I'm gonna do this again. This is a time of celebration. And I I want to, before I do anything else, bring you all greetings on behalf of the United Church of Christ, national offices. We are actually located in Cleveland, Ohio. And so, I'm a little bit far from home, but usually I am. And so the national setting, we have about 130 employees that work on behalf of the national church. And so I have been on that staff for 15 years as of March 1, and I have been in this role for a long total of 9 months. Brand spanking new, y'all. And so it's a joy to be able to be here with you because even though I live in Cleveland, I'm going to tell you about how I'm connected to the fig tree and how I ended up here because we're going to do story. That's what we're here, right? It's about telling stories. And I always like to think of myself as a storyteller, not in the gossipy sense. I just think that stories make community and that they help us to learn, to understand about each other. And usually the thing that we take away from encounter is story, right? Sometimes we don't remember the details of the moment. We don't remember the facts and the data, but we tend to remember the stories because there's something that is mostly humanizing about the stories that we tell and that we share with each other. It is said that when you see a fig tree or its fruit in a dream, that you are about to enter a period of growth and prosperity in your life. Did you all know that when you decided to call this thing the fig tree? The fig tree is steeped in ancient meaning and symbolizes wisdom and success in an abundance. Isn't that a beautiful thing? I am one of those people who interprets dreams, and so symbols and symbolism and all of those kinds of things have meaning, right? And so when I read this, I thought to myself, when they were dreaming this thing up, did they really realize what the symbolism of this moment meant in choosing to call this the fig tree? The co-founders of the fig tree dared to dream of this fig tree, which I believe is a blessing and continues to flourish among us. May wisdom and success in abundance continue to be present with you as you continue to connect us and provide an ecumenical and interfaith space for supporting the ministries of many in this area and around the world. And hopefully that joy will be another 40 years and more. So I celebrate you tonight. I'm going to give cues along the way too. In 2009, I joined the staff of the United Church of Christ, National Ministries in Cleveland, as the Minister for Racial Justice. That part is in the bio, right? It was a move that took me from life in sunny Miami, Florida, to the shores of Lake Erie. I got on a plane one morning in Miami where it was 82 degrees in March, and landed in Cleveland where it was 8 degrees and snowing. I also discovered that my winter coat was on the truck, and I was on a plane, and that was a problem. The lake was frozen. I remember that day like it was yesterday, and at least one day each winter, I have a conversation in the mirror with myself about that day. 15 years, and we're still having that conversation about that thing. 2 years after joining the staff, I was called to serve as the Minister for Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations, and to do that work for the National Church. And it was a position that really was my second call within the national setting. This is my fourth job with them, y'all, in 15 years. In that role, I became acquainted with the work of the Fig Tree and met Mary Stamp and other members of the staff. Now, it's interesting because the Fig Tree regularly arrived at my office. At first, I really had no idea how or why, but there it was, and I would read through and discover these nuggets of information throughout the years, and much of that would help me to understand how the work that I was doing as ecumenical officer was actually being amplified in the pews and in the world. So my role as ecumenical officer for the United Church of Christ was to ensure that the denomination is connected to other faith communities. That includes Christian and other faith traditions. And so this included Christian councils of churches, our Christian communions, our world communions, our interfaith partners. And so my work was on the national level, and through the articles that were in the Fig Tree, I had this glimpse into community, all the way from Cleveland, looking monthly at what y'all were doing in Spokane, and figuring out that the work that we were doing in the national settings, right, was actually making meaning and sense in local community. And so I'm grateful for that glimpse. 13 years later, the Fig Tree is still coming to the office. And except somebody else is in that office. And so now I have discovered that I can read the Fig Tree on the internet and still stay connected to the ways in which you are living and creating the beloved community which the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed about. And so as we gather to celebrate this anniversary, it is also, I believe, a time for reflection. There are those who believe, I read a lot about fig trees for this, because that's who I am. I want to know things. There are those who believe that the large roots of the fig tree represent the past, that its trunk represents the future, and that its branches represent the future to come. And so 40 years is a long time to do anything, and this is especially to be applauded as we look back on the history of the fig tree, which is very ably captured on the website if you haven't seen it. And if you have not read that article, I would suggest that you do so and learn a little bit more about the history. And I was also pleased to see that the World Council of Churches also wrote a wonderful article, or at least picked up an article, about the work of the fig tree and this particular night of celebration. And for those of you who don't know, the World Council of Churches is located in Geneva, Switzerland. So we're talking about global recognition. It's important. I serve on the Central Committee, which is the governing body for the World Council of Churches, and also serve on the Executive Committee for the World Council of Churches, one of the many places where I serve. And so the work of the fig tree in amplifying and connecting the community to that global body is also very important, because again, the work that we do ecumenically is only alive and well in the ways in which we see it happening in local community. Now, there are lots of things that are not in my bio. And one of those things is the fact that I'm a poet. And so I want you to receive this evening as a time of poetry and words in a variety of ways, both providing reflection, but also providing story in a way that allows us to reflect on this moment that we're in. And so I chose a number of poems that I thought would be appropriate for our time together. And the first poem is called Painting Pictures. What's the name of the poem? Painting Pictures. Thank you. Okay. Let fly the words you hear, tumbling like sacred waters falling. Let fly the words that come silent on the wings of owls, flying into the dusk to sleep with the morning. Let fly the words you hear, vibrant like paint on butterflies' wings. Let fly the words that come painting the joy of your heart, echoing the wounds deep within. Let fly the words you hear visiting in the drops on a rainy day. Let fly the words that come drifting like clouds taking shape on a sunny day. Let fly the words you hear spinning your tails like spiders' webs. Let fly the words that come. Bless the words that leave floating away on a summer breeze. Let fly these words you hear. Feel the life they bring, stories that enter from without, stories poured from within. Let fly the words that come on the first breath of morning light, singing new life, planting new hope with the unfolding sunrise. Let them fly, these words, they cannot die. Adrift across time and space, let fly these words, a gift of beauty to share. Let them go, painting pictures on their way. I believe that words have power, and that the power is both in the written and in the spoken word. I believe that stories create community, as I said before, and I also believe that the power in the stories that we tell create something as they go. When I talk about stories, I am talking about the truth of our lives rather than the fiction we create or the exaggerated tales that we carry that become gossip, creating damage and doing harm. Stories connect us and move us closer together, offering us the opportunity to hear and to learn from each other differently. These words we string together as story to convey the meaningful occasions in our lives are important for us as individuals and as community. I served for 8 years as the ecumenical officer for the church, dating from 2011 to 2019. In those years, there are many stories to be told. There are stories of flights missed and baggage lost. Stories of being present for historic moments, and others where I was a part of creating something new or being a part of something that was far greater than a single community. These are stories with a variety of backdrops both here in the United States and around the world, because community is more than the cities and states that we live in. We are a part of a global community, and we contribute to the experiences of others in the world. In 2013, I had the pleasure of organizing the United Church of Christ delegation to the 10th World Council of Churches General Assembly in Busan, Korea, which was led by our General Minister and President at the time. The meeting convened from the 20th of October to the 8th of November. That was almost 3 weeks and included pre-assembly meetings, gatherings with the Christian community in Seoul, daily worship, and the business of the assembly. This was almost 3 weeks and included a lot of people. There were about 4,000 people gathered for this meeting. At that meeting, there were about 25 people present from the United Church of Christ. It was there that I met Mary. We had traded emails and connected ahead of the meeting, and I still have on my phone the picture that we took, gathered one afternoon outside the meeting hall. Now, trying to fit 25 people into one picture is no easy feat. And every time we thought we had it done, somebody else would run up who was missing and needed to be included. Eventually, we got it done, and over the course of those days, we met as a group for dinner, I think twice, and we had the chance to meet each other as we shared and learned in that broader community about each other, because we were coming from different parts of the United States. I still have relationships forged during those days in Busan. And there are days when Busan comes up in conversation with colleagues. It was quite the event, and those stories amassed in those days continue to be recalled when I am with these colleagues. I have appreciated seeing and experiencing the presence of the Fig Tree staff in these global ecumenical spaces. Jen was in Karlsruhe, Germany, for the 11th Assembly of the World Council of Churches, and we had some time to sit and chat about lots of interesting things and about the agenda that was going on there. Connecting the local to the global is so important because our lives are contextualized. And quite often, our 24-hour news cycle doesn't afford us the opportunity to make meaning of the ways in which we are connected. The spaces that we create for hearing from and sharing with each other is incredibly important. Our world, with its technologically charged experiences, is far reduced in communication. Voicemail, email, Zoom calls, Zoom messages. All of these offer the opportunity to connect in a variety of ways, and that would include the old-fashioned way of going out to meals. That still happens. Some days, I lament the distance that has come as a result of technology. With each new advance, it seems that we have moved further and further away from the ability to connect in meaningful ways. This is true of our pandemic-informed world, and I believe this was much the case before COVID-19. We had already moved into leaving voicemail messages for each other, texting to see if we could connect to talk, and were managing voyeuristic living via multiple social media platforms, scratching at the surface of knowing each other and creating deeper relationships for our lives. In so doing, we have lost some of the connections that are needed for creating a better world. The power of story is remarkable. It is the painting of pictures with words. The power is the strength that comes in the telling of the story. When you or I tell a story into a space, we do so with many assumptions. We hope for safety. We hope to be heard. We hope that the story that we tell will be received, and in some cases, we hope that our stories will be affirmed. The power of the story and the empowerment that comes is for the storyteller and also for the listener. Both parties are empowered in the telling of the story. We want our stories to be heard, and here in the faith community, where do we tell our stories? Who do we tell these stories to? And more importantly, what do we have to say, and how does the story shape and make meaning to the need for us to be present in the face of injustices as advocates, allies, and agitators? I like alliterations. Our ability to stand against injustices as people of faith is supported by stories. Movements for justice in this country and globally are brilliantly captured with the stories of coalitions built, relationships forged, and communities transcending differences to ensure that all are treated with respect and able to live with full human rights and dignity. Our archives are replete with stories about the civil rights movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, women's movement, the Poor People's Campaign, the March on Washington, and many more. In these stories, we hear the ways in which people came together to make a difference. We hear the stories of communities of faith answering the call to love faithfully. And it is a call. And in those moments, the hope for a world to come is made manifest among us. I find that one of the most powerful places for stories is in the places where we sometimes experience ourselves as different. If we are willing to tell some of our deepest learnings or to share some of our deepest learnings, when we come and sit with others and we are willing to listen to the stories they share about their own life experiences, it changes us. We are transformed. We learn when we choose to be non-judgmental, and that's the thing, in the presence of the story and allow ourselves to be there in the moment, listening and making meaning of what we hear. And being non-judgmental when we hear is safety for the listener. This is true of printed stories or stories that we hear from friends and acquaintances. Stories drive a point home in ways that are personal and engaging. Stories bring far away places to our front doors and allow us the chance to ask questions and dig deeper. I have found over the years that listening to the raw truths of people's experiences in the United States and around the world, communicated through the power of story, has given me the gift of being more readily prepared to be a stronger advocate and activist for change. This was true of the stories of comfort women in Japan that I heard when I visited. And those stories were shared to assist us in understanding the legacy of an issue that is no longer in the news. The power of story impacted my life as I visited with communities on the shores of Bangladesh and heard the ways that climate change has eroded the coastline, salinated the soil, and reduced the ability to grow food necessary to sustain community. In Nigeria, I heard about the tragedy of families being torn apart by religious violence. In all these places, I was present with those who were willing to tell their stories. What are the stories that we are willing to tell in order to bring about the change that we desire to see in the world? It cannot be that we always are the listeners and the receivers of stories. The truth is that our relationships require that there is mutuality in our sharing of stories. One group's stories is just one side of an issue. And so we have to create the space to be able to do what it is that we believe is required of us in community. The last poem is called Beautiful Gift. The questions visit, blooming from perceived differences, a piercing challenge to the imagination. We are left wondering why life would grant us such a beautiful gift. Can we see ourselves as worthy? Our lives more than mere watershed, more than dividing forces. We are waters flowing freely. We are the beauty of dawn in high places. How do we live beyond the boxes, beyond the borders and boundaries? How do we make our own freedom, create our world we know is destiny? Can we look into each other's eyes Can we look into each other's souls, see the vision of together in our eyes? We are more than the world claims for us. We are meant to journey this life. The questions line the pathway, painted ribbons on a cloudy sky. We wonder, but there is no confusion. The beautiful gift of life, love, found us dispelling the lie. Release the questions to the wind. Watch them take wings as we choose to fly, transcending the world's misguided restrictions, transforming borders with this beautiful gift. The gift is love. What we don't have is time. And so in every moment that happens, that is given to us, we have the power of our words, we have the power of engagement, and we have the power to create and share stories that make a difference, empower our lives, and also have the power to change the world around us. May it be so. Got to put the furniture back.
Can we blow Dr. Thompson a kiss? What we're going to do right now is we're going to have a panel discussion to reflect on the remarks that Dr. Thompson gave us, as well as talking about the values and the future of Big Tree in our community. Wow, that's weird. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to do what you did. That's smart. You got it right on there. Okay, we figured this out. All right, so we have three panelists, and there's going to be three reflective pieces. And then the last part at 7:20, 7:30, we'll have an interfaith celebration, because we are celebrating, right? Such a party on Sunday night, come on. Okay, so Auxiliary Bishop Kinlow, where are you? Oh, there you go, yeah. Okay. We're set then, aren't we? Okay. Bishop is from the Church of God, I'm gonna get my glasses, in Christ, Washington. And we have three bishops. Teamwork. You're a poet, but you're also a caretaker. Thank you. Bishop Meggan Manlove is the Northwest Intermountain Evangelical Lutheran Church in America since July 2023. And then our third panelist is Bishop Gretchen, there you are, Gretchen Rehberg, okay. And she's from the Episcopal Diocese of Spokane, bishop since 2017. So the three prompts that we're going to use is each respond to the speaker's presentation. The second one is comment on the role and value of the fig tree in the region. And the third prompt, reflective, is offer a blessing for the future of the fig tree. And so who wants to go first? Okay, great.
So what a great night, eh? Yep. Food, fabulous food. I remember when I thought that 40 was old. I don't think that anymore. I just came from my mother's, was her birthday weekend. The family we gathered and we told stories. Because that's what families do. They tell stories. And sometimes you remember those stories a little different. My brother and I have this one. Comes up every time. He's wrong. But families tell stories. And it is a beautiful reminder that those stories are when we think about how do we work together, it's a global and a local. Some of you might know the phrase 6 degrees of separation. Turns out, it is a mathematical truth. It is mathematically proven that you can find 6 degrees of separation between you and any other person on this planet. That's it, 6 degrees. What does that tell us about the stories we should be telling about our relationship with every other person on this planet? Prior to becoming a bishop, prior to becoming ordained, I was a scientist and I was a firefighter. And science would tell us, statistically, biologically, and I would now say theologically, we are all family. If you just go back in time, just to when the first pale-skinned people, well, okay, not back to when the first Norwegians showed up, but when the first English showed up, right? There are so many great-grandparents that just everybody in this room, we are related. And science, pure statistics, tells us we're all related. Biology tells us we're all related. And theology tells us we're all related. And mathematically within 6 degrees. Right? So when we tell our family story, sometimes we tell it differently. So I was talking to somebody who was a newspaper editor one day, and I said, why are all the stories about everything that's going wrong? And he said to me, because those are the stories people will pay money for. So Mary Stamp is the most amazing person in the world. And I said, we need to learn how to fundraise like Mary does. Because when Mary asks you for a check, what do? Right? You give it to her. But part of that is if we're going to tell stories that make a difference, we need to worry about what stories are we telling. Are we telling stories of hope and unity and celebration? Are we telling stories where we work together and offer a different vision? Or are we telling the same old stories of separation, isolation, division, loneliness, fear, anger, oppression? Or are we saying that's not who we're made for? That's not what we're made for? Or do we allow those stories to say, I'm way more than 6 degrees separated from you? Or do we say, no? So when I was in the fire department, one of the things we said was, no one ever goes alone. Ever. No one ever goes alone. Now, my tradition, one of the things I noticed is that when Jesus sent out the disciples, he never sent them out alone. We always go together. And there's an Air Force general who once said, there is no limit to what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. What are we willing to give up for the sake of the greater good? Are we willing to give up that sense that somehow my religion is better than yours, my denomination is better than yours, my way of thinking is better than yours? Are we willing to say, no, as we are reminded, by listening to each other's story, I can learn something. Which means you got to be curious. You got to be courageous enough to be vulnerable and say, I was wrong. Never thought about it that way before. You need to be willing to say, you know what? We kind of screwed up. Now, again, what I know is that the faith communities, I could be wrong about this, but I don't know any other community other than faith communities where we actually confess we screwed up. I mean, maybe politicians, but I don't, no offense. But usually, it's a pro forma, right? It's not no, actually, we confess. Right? Because in the telling of the stories, part of that is to acknowledge that we get it wrong at times. But the hope lived out in those stories is that we can do something better. We can be better. We can tell the good stories of working together. We can tell the stories of communities transformed. We can show a vision and say, here's what it is right now. Here's what it can be. Which would you prefer? I often say to folks, look, if you don't want the world to change, just keep doing what we're doing. But if you want something different, well, let's work for that together. There's no limit to what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. So I am very grateful. And I first got to know the fig tree when I showed up as a parish priest in Lewiston, Idaho, and this thing kept coming to the office once a month. I was like, what is this? Right? And then I got the directory, and it's like, okay, this is interesting. And what I realized is it's amazing to have a list. Anything you want, you just open that up and you'll find it. And if you're feeling down, you just open up the fig tree and you read it. And if you got to figure out who I can partner with, you can find that too. Because what I know is this, I often tell my board, I am as smart as anybody in this room. But I'm not as smart as everybody in this room. Right? When we work together, there's amazing things we can do. We need to tell the stories that unite. Because we also know people are telling stories to divide. We need to have the louder voices be the uniting voices, the voices of love, the voices of unity and being together and working for a better future, and not those stories that are stories of fear and division, separation. Those stories are out there. And unfortunately, they sell. So if we want the other stories to be out there, we need to buy. Hence the check. All right, Betsy, there we go. So when I think about the next 40 years, because I'm in that next 40, I won't say what I did for my 40th birthday. It did involve margaritas. Because I felt old at that point. I know, now I realize no. 40 is just getting going. You're just starting to get wise. So I'm really looking to see what the next 40 years are going to be. And I think if we want that voice and the stories of unity and a different way of life, let's work to make sure that continues. So my prayer is that we will, in this room, commit to sharing a story of what the fig tree can do. And it's not just about a newspaper, it's about a way of life. It's about a way of being together. It's about a way of working ecumenically and interfaith and with anybody who will work for us to make a difference in this community, beyond this community, and in the world. Thank you very much.
Okay. To follow Bishop Gretchen. Well, you made me think a lot about my dad, and there's just a few people who might know, or who know my dad, was a storyteller, and a lot of them were about me, and so I didn't really like that as a kid, of course. I mean, lots of people do that. My dad also wrote all of those stories down. Like there's a Meggan Stories file. And when I read them now, though, as an adult who preaches and tells stories, what I realize is they're really stories about Jerry Manlove. And he's being vulnerable and talking about the ways that he's changed and the way that conversations with his 3, 4, 5, 10-year-old daughter impact his life and his faith and his view of the world. And so I'm grateful now that I have that collection of stories. And I've been thinking for a long time about how they are tools for empathy and hope and healing and connection. And lots of people are working at that. Last I serve congregations from Leavenworth to Jackson, Wyoming. So I spend a lot of time in Idaho, and Boise State has partnered with, our Boise State University has started this program, Idaho Listens. Does anybody? So I went to the first in-person event that I had been invited to, and you listen to 12 people tell their stories, and you can't applaud, you can't respond, just sit there, and they try to get very different stories told, and very personal stories. And then that community of storytellers continues to meet beyond that one event. And so they're trying to create these communities of listening and telling the stories. And I've been thinking a lot about the importance of listening, but what I loved about what you said is that we do have the responsibility to tell the stories too. And a couple of my friends were invited to tell their stories, and I knew parts of their stories, but the larger community didn't. And it was a powerful experience for both the storyteller and the listeners. So just grateful for that reflection. The other thing that I'm just celebrating tonight is the ecumenism, the interfaith. I think it's the present, it's the future. It's also the past. I'm grateful to all of the people. I've never been more proud to be in full communion with the UCC as tonight. And when I was a young pastor in rural Iowa, I would go to church events, and they would say, the ELCA is in full communion with more denominations, blah, blah, blah. And I would say, oh, big deal, whatever. But it is a really big deal. and I'm so grateful to the people in the national offices like you and some of the people that we talked about at dinner who do that work, because it makes it so much easier than when I need to talk to Phil about, could we partner in this one corner of our geography? So it is really related, and how do we, beyond what you did beautifully tonight, how do we help everybody understand those connections? But just a reminder that that's part of my work and part of the work of the Fig Tree, and thank you for that. I'm actually a script person, so I'm going to read what I wrote about the Fig Tree. I'm grateful, and it's very similar, some of the threads that you picked up. I'm grateful for the fig tree covering stories of abundance. So much of what I read speaks from a scarcity mindset. Even in a job, when I visit ministries each week trying to bring in the reign of God, it is easy to become cynical and think that there is not enough, and that the only news is truly bad news. Your stories remind us every month of communities bringing life and healing to a broken world. Thank you.
Thank you. I was asked, that's why I'm coming last, they asked me to pray for the fig tree. Thank you, dear. I am happy for the fig tree, and some of the stories that I have read down through the years. I have been here for the whole 40 years. So they asked me to pray for the success of the fig tree. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. We thank you for the fig tree and for the editor that has carried this paper for the last 40 years. It has benefited this community. Give them strength and give them courage. And we pray for the success and the continuance of this fig tree throughout the Northwest, and I understand from Dr. Thompson, even from Cleveland, Ohio, and other parts of the country. Father God, in the name of your Son, Jesus, bless this fig tree and its editor, and let the glory of you be made manifest. In your name we pray. Thank you. They told me 1 minute.
One more time for the three panelists, please.